Welcome to this chess video, everyone. Here I have a really cool chess calculation technique. It's definitely one to add to your arsenal. I learned this one from Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and it's a really helpful technique to use in complicated positions where you have multiple possibilities available. Now this technique is much easier to describe with examples, so let's just get to this first example I have here in front of us, and I'll explain this technique as we go. Now this is one of the chess.com daily puzzles, and I solved this one fairly quickly without too much thinking, only because I knew this technique. If you want to try to solve the puzzle yourself, you can do so. Now the main points of this puzzle is, of course, in this position, we have a discovered attack on their king if this knight ever moves. And so you have to first start calculating the possible options. Really, this one or this one are the only really valid tries because it is a double check. And we need that to be the case, or otherwise they can just simply block. For example, if we move the knight to f4, they can just block with rook to f7. And they can afford to give back material because they're up by 4 points of material in this position. But it might be kind of complicated to start calculating for knight e7 check, as well as knight f6 check. So why not calculate them both simultaneously? And that is the point of this quantum calculation technique. So I imagine I move my knight somewhere, ideally these two squares, but I don't know which yet. And I don't have to. The only legal move for their king is h8. They couldn't block because, again, the knight would have been giving check as well as the bishop, and they couldn't go here because that walks into the scope of our bishop. Long-range piece is pretty effective. Okay, so now the king is on h8. How can we follow up the attack? Now here, a lot of chess players will recognize that there is a checkmating pattern that is in front of us. If you don't see it yet, you may want to take a look at this really old video I made, checkmates that you really need to be familiar with. The pattern here is that the bishop is controlling this diagonal, and we have potential to get something onto the h-file, in this case our rook on h1, by this capture. And so how would I open up the h-file? I would need their h-pawn gone, and how I would do that is to make it forced into capturing g6. And now I think you see the point of this quantum calculation. I moved my knight to one of these two squares but didn't know which one was best. Now I know the knight to e7 is actually the correct move because we have this check available in that variation. So the first move is knight e7 check, king to h8 as predicted, and then knight g6 check. The pattern goes they cannot come back because our bishop, so they are forced into capturing. And now we open up the h-file. This would be checkmate, but they can capture our rook, we'll capture back, and then it's easy to forget their long diagonal bishop capturing our rook. But now this has opened up the h-file for our queen instead. And checkmate followed pretty easily. Who would have known that this puzzle from this position is actually a forced checkmate in 5? But we were able to follow all the moves perfectly because we used our quantum calculation technique. Alright, so here's a second example. The opponent is up a bunch of material, so we're definitely going for checkmate here. The question is, which of these pawn moves is actually going to be the needed one? It's clear we have to start with the check, and a pawn move is really the only check that we have available. So this is a perfect opportunity to use this quantum calculation technique. I just visualize one of these pawns up, but I don't have to know which. So now let's just pass and imagine that they're in check. Either one, from here or here, their king has to move to the back rank. Now if king to either of these two squares, this will be checkmate, because one of our pawns is going to control e7. So the only real try is one of these pawns here, king back to d8, and now the only reasonable check we have here is knight to b7 check. They cannot capture because of the pin, and so now I'm noticing that their king could come up and escape while attacking our knight. So wouldn't it be nice if we could control the c7 square? And now you see it. This technique has shown us that the correct quantum calculation move was pawn to d6 check. They're forced back, we give that check, and now the pawn controls that square. If we had used the f-pawn instead, attacking the rook is meaningless when we're down so much material, and their king will be able to get away because this square would not be controlled. Because they can't escape to c7, they're forced back to e8, and now this move is checkmate. Now I'll give one more example, and then I'll describe why this technique is named the way that it is. Now this is an Endgame study that was actually from 1890, but the very first time that I saw this was immediately after I learned this technique from Daniel Naroditsky. And this looked like a perfect opportunity to test out this quantum calculation technique, because they capture our rook, and we are up 4 points of material, but it looks like they're about to get a queen. Now there's a lot of complications we have to look at. There's so many variations available when they get a queen. It's just so much brute force calculation. Or you can use quantum calculation to simplify things and make it easier for you. I don't have to calculate exactly where the piece is, I just have to know that I move it, and then I can kind of backtrack and figure out where that piece actually would have been best located. Now this is a beautiful endgame study. If you want, you can pause the video and try and solve it yourself. I think it took me roughly half hour the first time I saw this. I was a bit lower rated in puzzles than I am now, but there was just so many variations that I had to work out. I'm almost certain I would have gotten this puzzle wrong if not for this calculation technique. Alright, now let's actually share what the answer to this puzzle is. The very first move is pawn to d7. We have to let them get a queen. If we give a check, there's no way to really follow up with good checks, and we're not able to catch this pawn, so that would just waste a move. The goal is we have to get a queen and then be able to block their checks so our extra material will be able to win. We didn't want to play the c7 pawn because then when they promote, they'll be attacking the c-file pawn, and that's not going to be good for us. So we let them promote, not much choice there. We promote as well, and we're up 4 points of material. We just have to block all the checks and then try and win their queen. Definitely easier said than done. Now here you have to look at this check, and the solution here is we just simply block with the knight, they run out of good checks, and this move was also a check here. So that would end their attack, and white is better. This pawn is going to be strong, and we're going to win the game. This check is blocked conveniently by our queen. Again, another reason it had to be the d-file queen and not the c-file queen. And there's other variations as well. You can take a look at those on your own time with an engine. But queen captures c6 is really the only valid try they have. Now we follow up with knight to g6 check, and the king's best defense is to go to e4. They can't really come up because then you have this move, and going here would walk into this fork. These two squares are not legal, and giving up the queen we're just not going to talk about. Okay, king e4 it is, and now things are fairly complicated. There's a lot of checks we have to look at, but when you take a look at this position long enough, you realize queen h4 check is the only one that really keeps the attack going. King e3 is the best defense. Queen e1 check, again, there's a lot of things to calculate. This is why this technique is very helpful. Queen g1 check, and now I'll pause here just to show one sample moment of this puzzle where you realize their king has no real good moves. Now let's go through all the possibilities together. They cannot go king d5 because that walks into this knight fork. They cannot go king e5 because of course that square is already controlled by our knight. They cannot go king e4 because then that would walk into a skewer and we'd win the queen. King e3 is illegal because our queen would be giving check. King d3 walks into this knight fork, winning the queen. King c3, that walks into the skewer. King c5 is illegal because of our queen giving check. And so king c4 was where they went in the puzzle, and that also loses the queen to this knight check. There was so many things to calculate in all these variations. Quantum calculation definitely helped me here. Now where exactly does this technique get its name from? In the world of physics, you have all of these laws that we know tend to apply to things that we observe, but then on a micro scale, it seems like there's a different set of laws that apply. Study of this we call quantum mechanics. Problem is both of them can't seem to be right. They conflict with each other. And if there's a physicist out there who can somehow come up with a way to join these two together, they'll probably be set for life, probably be writing books, giving lectures, and probably win a bunch of science awards in the process. The thing with quantum mechanics is I think a lot of people probably misuse that term, or at the very least they overuse it. So instead of using quantum, I like to think of it more as an electron. If you imagine an atom, you've got these little electrons flying around, and they stay within this general zone. But by the time you calculate exactly where that electron is, it is already somewhere else. These are extremely quick moving. Calculating where your piece is kind of like an electron cloud. I'll go back to the very first position here. This is almost like our electron cloud. The knight has to be in one of these two zones, but we don't know which. And so if we calculate one at a time, it might be more difficult than if we just assume it's in both places at once, kind of like Schrodinger's cat. And then on the next move, we'll figure out where this knight is best located. In this case, it was this move to follow up with the check, so we knew that knight to e7 was the correct way. Now the location of electrons is a little bit different than the word quantum itself. One could argue this might even be misnamed. But let's be real here, I think it's named this because quantum sounds kind of cool. So okay, thanks for stopping by everyone. I'll see you in the next chess video.